Welcome everybody. I hope you're all in good health, and hope to see you next year at Radboud University, maybe as one of our students. My name is Robert Rademakers. I'm a junior lecturer and researcher at our university. So if you're going to study at our university, going to study economics, you'll probably see me as one of your lecturers. And today you are visiting us as a student of a day opportunity. Today I'm going to give a lecture about how to beat Corona economically, so not health-wise, but we're going to look at how we as economists can help and beat the crisis. So my name is Robert Rademakers. Again, you can always send me an email if you have any questions with regard to our content or with regard of us making a decision for your study. You can also contact the study advisor. I think you will find the link somewhere in the chat or online. And you can always email her in order to ask questions about the study. So now I'm going to give a little lecture, a small lecture about how to beat Corona. And I think we have all seen it in the news. There is not only a health crisis, but there is also an economic crisis in Europe and actually across the globe. And we can basically summarize these problems in three images, what you can see here. The Corona crisis is not only leading to decrease in economic production, how we see that GDP estimates that they are crumbling, that they are decreasing. So it is a problem for countries as such. Italy is maybe going into bankruptcy, but we also see that there is a problem in the financial markets. We see that stocks are going to have plumped in the recent months. We see it in Japan, in China, in Europe, in the United States. It's happening everywhere. Basically, our financial markets, they are destabilized by the coronavirus. But we also see that companies themselves are going into bankruptcy. We see that KLM, for instance, our Dutch aircraft carrier, is having really major issues finding money in order to finance themselves. So what we can see is that the Corona crisis actually consists of three separate crises. It is a government crisis. GDP is decreasing. We see that governments having issues of repaying themselves. Italy may be going into bankruptcy. We see that the Corona crisis is a financial problem. We see stock prices dropping significantly. And we see that it is a crisis for business and companies, that a lot of companies across Europe are facing potential bankruptcy. And this is actually how we as Radboud perceive economics. We believe that we have to understand these various levels interrelatedly in order to understand economic problems. So we have to study what happens to business. We have to understand what happens to financial markets. That's what we call financial economics. And we know what has to happen, what happens with international economics and policy, with countries. How can countries face this crisis? And we know they are interrelated, but I will delve into it a little bit deeper case by case. So business economics, financial economics, and international economics and policy. And I'll do that on the basis of our hope, let's say our medicine that we are using in order to combat the crisis. And that is the European Central Bank. So the European Central Bank for Europe is basically the institution that determines how much money is in our economy. So should there be more euros or should there be less euros? And we see that countries themselves and governments are struggling to take measures in order to prevent this economic crisis from severing. But the central bank was really quick in announcing what we call a pandemic emergency purchase program. And it's nothing more than the ECB printing 750 billion additional euros, basically putting a lot of additional liquidity and money into our economy. But why would they do that? And why is this basically our first line of defense? What is the, let's say, the theory that is behind this? And I'm going to show you in this really short lecture what is the rationale of the ECB being our, let's say, our help, our hope in this time of crisis. So the basic idea of central banking is that a central bank prints a lot of new money. And with this new money, with this newly printed euros, it's a kind of casa de papel, you get this kind of feeling. What they are doing with it is that they buy a lot of financial products. So the ECB, our central bank, what they do is they buy up a lot of government bonds, but they also give loans to banks. So Rabobank, ING, our Dutch banks, they can borrow really cheaply from the central bank with this newly printed money. So what happens, and that's what you see in step 3, is that interest rates, basically the money that you pay to borrow money, that it goes down because there is so much money in the system. The ECB is providing a lot of liquidity. We see that interest rates are going down. And because interest rates are going down, that's good for companies. They can invest more. If Albert Heijn wants to renovate its store during the coronavirus, they can borrow really cheaply money from one of the banks, and they can renovate. And this helps the economy from recovering and make sure that there are still jobs for people, that they don't become unemployed. So this is the theory. But in order to understand how it really happens, how it really affects our economy, we have to again look back at these 3 different spheres of the economy. So how does, let's say, this money injection of the ECB help companies? So let's suppose we're looking at the balance sheet of KLM, the Dutch aircraft carrier. And balance sheets are really important tools in business economics in order to identify problems that are happening within companies. So that's what we also study with business economics. We zoom in on companies and look how they are affected by the world around them. So this is a simple balance sheet, and on the asset side you see what companies own. So in this case we see KLM has cash, it has some dollars and euros in its vaults, and it owns planes, right? So it has planes to fly from Amsterdam all over the world, and in order to make profits. And on the liability side, we can see how companies get money for their assets. So how does KLM get money in order to get cash and to have planes? Now we see that KLM, in our simplified example, has some bank loans. So KLM goes to Rabobank in order to get money, and they also have some shares of stock, right? So KLM says, who wants to become owner of KLM? Who wants to own a stock of KLM? And people invest in KLM, so they want to become owner of KLM. Now, we say that they are evenly important. Now, maybe one more important thing: why does KLM want to hold cash? And maybe they have to pay some other companies that they get resources from. So let's say that KLM needs oil in order to fuel its planes. They need cash in order to pay that, or they need cash in order to pay employees, or they need cash in order to pay all sorts of resources. Now, what is the problem of the corona crisis? Basically, the revenues of KLM stopped. There is no new revenues being created by KLM. There are no flights going anymore between Amsterdam and South Africa, Brazil, the United States. Basically all flights have been cancelled. So the revenues are stopping. They are, there's no generation of new cash flows, what we would call. However, the costs are still accumulating. They still have to pay their employees. They still have to pay Shell for the oil that they use. So basically, KLM is facing what we call a liquidity problem. KLM itself, if everything is going back normal, is a healthy company. They can make profit. There is nothing wrong with it, but they basically have a short of liquidity, of cash money, because the cash is going out. They have to pay all kinds of institutions, but there is no new cash coming in. So that is the problem for business economics. That's the problem that KLM faces. They don't have enough cash. So why is the ECB so important for them? What we've seen before is the ECB provides a lot of loans to banks, so cheap loans to banks. Rabobank can borrow really cheaply from our central bank. So that also makes it possible for KLM to get additional loans from Rabobank in order to get additional cash. So what is the rationale here? KLM will go to Rabobank and they will say, okay, Rabobank, we need cash in order to pay Shell, in order to pay our employees. Please provide us with additional cheap loans in order to get cash. So this is the business economics perspective on the ECB policy. Now, then we have the financial stability. We have seen that stock prices have plummeted, that it was even worse than during the financial crisis of 2008. So how can we explain this crisis? And for that, we can use a simple graph. So we see a different tool. For business economics, we have used a balance sheet, and now we're using a graph. And what basically happened is that there was a demand shock. We see that the price is here, so let's say the stock price, and here is the quantity. If the prices increase, there is more supply. Companies are more willing to offer stocks, and if the prices increase, people are less willing to buy stocks. That's a basic demand and supply graph that I think you know from high school. So what basically happened, there was a demand shock in the stock markets. People didn't want to buy stocks anymore because there was all kinds of risks associated with owning stocks, being an owner of a company. So what did the ECB do? Indirectly, and in some countries, like in Japan, directly, they bought up stocks. So what happens, it is a kind of stabilizer for the financial markets. It makes sure that stock prices don't decrease even more. It is basically an increase in the demand for stocks because the central bank directly or indirectly buys up these stocks. So that restores the prices. So this is the rationale from financial economics. And then we go to international economics and policy. We look at the countries themselves. And we know that the countries themselves are facing two big issues. First of all, we see that GDP growth is going down a lot. So in the Netherlands, we say that GDP is decreasing with 25% this year. That means that our income, everything that we earn in a year as people, decreases with 25% on average. For some people, let's say their income decreases with 50%. For other people, it stays the same. But on average, people will lose 25% of their income, which is huge. As an economist, I think that only happened during the Second World War, such a big drop in income. But there is a second problem, and that is companies might go into bankruptcy. How we see that this crisis basically leads to, let's say, a spillover to countries going into bankruptcy. Maybe you've seen it on the news. Italy is on the brink of bankruptcy. Now, how can we explain that? Now, actually, we can use a simple formula for that. So we know that the GDP of a country consists of various components: consumption, investment, government expenditures, G, and NX, that is exports minus imports. So basically, as the Netherlands, we are really good at that. Now, what is the problem with the corona crisis? The government is basically not allowing us to consume. So they basically say, okay, you can't go to the terrace, you can't go to the cinema. Consumption is basically limited. So that's basically explaining why output is going down, why we are facing a recession right now. What is happening? What explains the governments being into trouble? That is basically that when output goes down, governments are automatically spending more. Think about it like this: if the economy is in a recession, it means that more people will get unemployment benefits. If output is going down, what we've seen in the Netherlands, they are paying people, entrepreneurs, in order to stay alive, at least their companies. And at the same time, we see that taxes, that they decrease, right? People lose income, so people can pay less taxes. So that explains this, let's say this formula explains these two problems, right? We see a reduction in output, and it has as consequence that governments also face problems, that they don't get enough money to finance themselves. Their expenditures exceed what they receive from the people in taxes. So our governments are in trouble as well. So what does the ECB want to do with this excessive liquidity of money? They basically want to stimulate consumption, because we can borrow cheaply, so we can buy new houses and we can buy new products. They also want to stimulate investment. What I said earlier, the example that Albert Heijn can borrow really cheaply to buy its new store, to build its new store. So that's what they try to do with this decrease in interest rates. And the secondary effect then, of course, is because output does not decrease that much, governments won't go into default as well. So governments will survive. That is the idea, at least. But what makes things worse is that, of course, everything is interrelated with each other. So now we have discussed these different perspectives separately. So we've said there is a sphere of business economics, there is a sphere of financial economics and of international economics and policy, but of course they are interrelated with each other. If financial markets, if they collapse, for companies like KLM, it becomes really hard to get money from the stock markets or from the financial markets. If banks, for instance, or companies are going into default, that also means that our governments have to save them. And that's also problematic for their government expenditures. So if our Dutch government has to save KLM because it doesn't have enough cash, it also means that our government has to pay a lot of money in order to save KLM. So that also has an effect on international economics and policy. So we see that these three spheres, they are interrelated with each other. And you cannot understand economics and economic problems and economic solutions as we did in this simple example if you don't combine them. And that is what we in Nijmegen do with the program International Economics and Business. That is basically our international program, the specialization that you can choose after the first year where you combine these three perspectives on economics, on economic problems and on economic solutions. Now, what we see is that these theories are really nice, that the theories how, for instance, the European Central Bank can stimulate businesses, financial markets and governments, but these are based, these theories, on classic economic theory. And basically this theory assumes that everyone is a supercomputer, that companies, governments, investors, traders, that they all make perfect decisions, that they basically have an extreme large Excel spreadsheet, that they make perfect calculations, and from these calculations that they make the most optimal decisions. But we know that humans and investors and even governments or banks, that they are not always making rational decisions. And what we've seen, for instance, is that the Italians and the Dutch people, that they were not discussing solutions for the crisis in Europe, but that they were basically blaming each other. It was more you could say a discussion about honor. The Dutch, they don't want to lose the honor for Northern Europe, and the Italians didn't want to lose the honor of Southern Europe. They basically blamed each other. It became a political game. It was not more about what was the right decision to do to save Europe, to save European countries. No, it was all about blaming each other about the past. It was not really about what was economically making sense. And what we call this cognitive biases. So what we basically see is that a lot of people working for the governments, people who are consuming companies, that they are not always making good, perfect decisions, but that they use rule of thumbs, basically things to make decision-making much more easy. That's what we call cognitive biases. So I'm not making difficult decisions by making this complete spreadsheet with all the information on the world, but I'm making decisions based on, let's say, rule of thumbs that normally, let's say, in day-to-day business work quite well. And some of these examples, I've listed three here. One of them is the self-serving bias. Probably you will have encountered this as well as a student one day. The self-serving bias basically tells us that if something bad happens, we always blame someone else. So if you get a bad grade for your exam, it's always the teacher, right? He is making a really bad exam, or he just asked a question that they didn't learn. But it's always, you're basically always externalizing problems. If bad things happen, it's always not your fault, it's someone else's fault. But if good things happen, it is always your responsibility. So if you get a good grade, it's always because you studied well, or you had a good planning, or you really like the subject, or you always internalize these issues. And that's the same thing what we see with the financial markets, for instance, with the Corona crisis. What we see is that if things go bad, they always attribute it to external things. So they say, okay, yeah, the stock markets are going down, but it's not my fault. I still believe that Ahold, in which I invested, is still a good decision. And that's why people often make bad decisions when trading stocks. And they hold too much, too long for investments that they make, because they believe if things go wrong, it's not their fault. They didn't make a bad decision, and that they were not investing in a bad company. No, they actually believe that they made a good decision. We also see sunk cost fallacy. The sunk cost fallacy basically means that as soon as we made certain costs, we don't want to change our plans. It's the basic gut feeling of this fallacy. What do we mean with that? For instance, if you bought a concert ticket, you go to Pinkpop or Tomorrowland, and you pay quite some money for that, we call it sunk cost, because you will never get your money back. The costs are basically being made in the past. But then at a certain day of the event, there was a lot of rain, snow, wind, and actually you don't have any incentive to go. You really hate this weather, and you really believe now you won't get any happier from going to the concert. We still see that a lot of people still go to the concerts because they still have in mind, okay, I made these costs, I paid 100 euro for this ticket, I still have to go even though I don't become happy because of this. And that's something we also see nowadays with the corona crisis. Even though it's really rational for a lot of companies to go bankrupt and to restart that business, we see that a lot of companies that they are really hesitant in order to go bankrupt, because what they basically lose is costs they made. They have invested a lot of time and effort in their company, and that's not something that they want to give up. And this is basically what we call behavioral economics and finance. This is the field where economics and psychology meet each other. And this is where we deviate from classical economics, right? So classical economics is all, okay, assume that everyone is a supercomputer. What is the best decision that governments and companies or whatsoever should take? But behavioral economics and finance basically say, okay, what if we if this assumption is false, what is, let's say, how are people actually behaving, and how can we shape policy in order to help people with that regard? And this is basically Radboud at economics. So what we do is we, on the one hand, combine these three classical perspectives on economics: business economics, looking inside the company and how they are related with the outside world; financial economics, how are financial markets operating; and international economics and policy. So that's basically how how countries regulate themselves, trade between countries, so more the international sphere of economics. But we combine that with a new perspective on economics. We combine that with, for instance, psychology, what you've seen with behavioral economics and finance. But not only that, we also combine it with sociology. What is the role of ethnicity? What is the role of racial background, of migration background for your probability to succeed in your economic life? Of law, how we know that regulation is really important. If we look at the corona crisis, for instance, it's a good example. Our government, they decide whether it's a good decision to go open or not, and that has a big impact on our economy. Also business administration, understand how companies work, and much more. So that's what we mean with Economics Plus. We try to integrate other fields in economics, and we are unique as program to that regard. We combine this classical perspective in economics. We take three perspectives and we combine it with Economics Plus. But Economics Plus is also more than just integrating psychology and sociology and law. It's also allowing yourself to make use of more methods in order to understand the world around us. So I hope to give you a small glimpse of what we mean with that. So we used balance sheets, we used graphs, we used formulas in order to understand the economy around us. And that's actually what we also mean with Economics Plus. What we see with classical economics is that the focus is mainly on mathematics, on formulas. But we believe at Radboud University that it's not only this hard economics, using more the science in economics, using the formulas, using the mathematics skills that you've learned during your high school careers. But it's also really important to rely on soft skills, on things like graphs. Sometimes they say more than formulas. So Economics Plus is integrating different fields, but also different tools in order to understand reality. So that's why I believe you should study economics at our faculty, at our university. So after the first year, when you start your economics program here, you choose which perspective to specialize in. So you can say, okay, I want to look more what happens inside these companies, and you pick business economics. And you can say, okay, I want to focus more on stock markets and bond markets, and then you pick a specialization financial economics. Or you are more interested in how governments shape economic policy, and then you pick international economics and policy. We also offer the fourth option, and that is international economics and business. And what we basically do there is combine these perspectives together with the opportunity for you to study abroad for half a year. Yeah, so you can study all around the world, Indonesia, South Africa, the United States, the UK, and you can combine these perspectives in order to understand economics. Yes, so that's in a glimpse what economics at Radboud is. It's these three or actually four perspectives combined with Economics Plus. Thank you very much. And if you have any questions, you can always contact me or one of my colleagues. You can find me on the Radboud website, and I hope to see you really soon at our university. Thank you very much.